The History of Manufacturing in the City of Wayne. An Overview by Alfred Brock. Part 2. Traditionally, blacksmiths were of a type that would today be called part of the service industry. If you have a flat tire today, you can get it repaired at a local mechanic or a chain store. In the days we are speaking of, the blacksmith had a job and he gave it to his son, and so on and so forth. The United States had already changed all that. Just because your father was a blacksmith did not mean you were going to be one. He might make soap. You could be anything your heart desired, as long as you worked for it. As it turned out, Mr. Derby brought in an established blacksmith to help get things started in our community. Now, a blacksmith needs a lot of things to get going. He needs some metal, and some tools, and some wood, and some coal, and leather, and water, and buckets, and hammers, and rods, and most of all, he needs customers. Around about Wayne were all the customers any hard-working blacksmith might desire. They were hard-working farmers and those engaged in the continuing lumber trade in the area. He was put to work immediately, fashioning and repairing all the bridles, brindles, breeches, nails, and other metal parts that are needed to run any respectable farm. It wasn't long before a hard-working blacksmith found himself in need of another thing. That other thing was help. So he hired help, who was doing a brisk business providing materials for and supporting the operations of local farmers, lumberjacks, and builders. Yes, builders. Mr. Ezra Derby was a builder, and having gotten on quite well, he went the next step and built himself a mill 1 year after he had set up our sturdy blacksmith in his trade. Now this was a wise thing to do because the blacksmith was a very necessary person to have nearby when one was operating a mill. Why is that? Because there were many metal parts in the new type of mill that had been built. The metal parts were parts of machines, and so modern manufacturing here in the city of Wayne found its origin in the mill of Ezra Derby and his associates. The machines that Ezra Derby had in his mill, well, they needed to be maintained. They needed to run often and long in order to make as large a profit as possible. This is the way with machines, and it seems it always has been and always will be. They needed to be cleaned, sharpened, and used as much as possible. Metal workers were needed. They needed to know what they were doing. They needed to be trained. They needed to be free to invent. And here on the frontier, they had that freedom in abundance, because if they didn't do it, no one else would. Self-reliance created Americans ready to face and overcome any challenge that came to them. The time of metalworking had begun. The traditional role of blacksmithing continued to be carried out in the city of Wayne into the early 20th century. Here we see an image of one of these establishments right here in Wayne. Hailed as the last in his trade in the city of Wayne, we see our last blacksmith shoeing a horse. The tools of his trade has been adapted, changed, developed, and automated all around him, and all around us are the results of this fabulous revolution of thought and action. The manufacturing future of the city of Wayne was shaped during the 1840s. The railroad and lake travel were used to provide the city of Detroit with the means to become a regional transportation center, and so the entire region was provided these advantages, including the city of Wayne. The important manufacturing elements of this time in this area were steel and iron goods and tobacco products. Grist mills were not only a local industry but provided finished goods for export. It was not until the early 19th century that automobiles began to dominate the manufacturing climate in this region. Prior to that major expansion, the top 10 industries around the city of Detroit were foundry and machine shop products, pharmaceuticals, tobacco products, stoves, general vehicles, buggies and wagons and sleighs and other contrivances, as well as early motor vehicles, meat packing, malt liquors, varnishes, flour, and men's clothing. Out of this list, the city of Wayne has participated in foundry and machine shop products, tobacco products, general vehicles, and flour, and that's a solid 3 out of 10 with representation from other industries. The city of Wayne has historically been closely integrated and in partnership with our neighbors, the state, and the nation. Just when things were starting to look good, the dark clouds of war began to gather. The United States had a great decision to make. Would slavery persist? Would states be able to come and go into the Union as they saw fit? Would the national character be accorded a place for all Americans, or would we forever fall into the fate and rivalry of Europe, with each state ruling itself and making every effort to rule its neighbors as well? The Civil War came and took a toll on the whole nation. As you know, the first troops to answer President Lincoln's call were from Michigan. Michigan Governor Austin Blair sent these troops, and President Lincoln is said to have stated that when he was informed the troops had reached the District of Columbia, "Thank God for Michigan." Mr. Derby's son, Ezra E. Derby, married Maria Monroe. On June 23, 1864, he died of wounds received at St. Petersburg, Virginia. The war took many men from Michigan, and it also spurred a second industrial revolution in the United States, both during and following the war. The need for food, clothing, and building materials grew after the war. This is our first of 3 digressions from the central topic of the history of manufacturing in the city of Wayne. As I was performing my research, I found a note concerning Mr. Derby that he had served at the siege of St. Petersburg as, quote, "only a caisson driver," or words to that effect. This struck me as strange, so here is some general information. We see here 2 guns that the United States Army fielded during the battle. The guns of the Confederate States Army were, from what I have seen, extremely large siege guns, and to give you an idea of the size of the cannon in use, you can look at the guns just outside the City of Wayne Historical Museum and know that the ones that they were firing at St. Petersburg were many times larger than them, and there were many, many more. Seen here is a line of caissons carrying troops and equipment. In spite of the danger, Mr. Derby did it anyway, and he sacrificed his own life. Considering what was to come here in the city of Wayne, his sacrifice takes on more significance for those who care. Let us continue away from war and things of destruction to those things of peace and construction. Construction, reconstruction, and growing was the name of the game in the United States of America, and Wayne was going to grow too. This is a map from the Illustrated Historical Atlas of the County of Wayne, Michigan, by H. Belden and Company, Charles Schober and Company, published in 1876. Note that in this picture, already in 1876, the nature of Wayne was being heavily influenced by the railroads. The Flint-Pere-Marquette Railroad is shown here running north and south, while the Michigan Central Railroad runs east to west. The railroads here made the future look good, hence the lots being set aside and buildings going up. And this is the end of part 2 of the history of manufacturing in the city of Wayne.